Good morning, everybody. This is a live update, live breaking news, as we have Hurricane Eta that has been renamed in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, with hurricane watches that have also been issued across the west coast of Florida. That includes Tampa all the way through Fort Myers, and still it is forecast to weaken down to tropical storm intensity, but just in case it notches up to hurricane intensity, that's why there is that hurricane warning that is in effect. There's also a tropical storm warning. Watch out for this little cloud top right there, just off of Fort Charlotte. Looks like a embedded supercell structure there that does have tornado potential, and there is a tornado watch that has been issued for these outer bands that are coming in from Hurricane Eta. And latest hurricane reconnaissance aircraft indicated a central pressure down to 983 millibars. But one thing we've noticed over the course of this morning is we have had major warming of these cloud tops. This is the infrared satellite imagery here. I'm going to show you the long loop to show you how Eta intensified overnight last night with big time convection wrapping all the way around the center. That helped to prompt those hurricane warnings for the west coast of Florida, including the Tampa area. But really my biggest concern this morning is the tornado potential, and there's a good thing that there is a tornado watch in effect. You can see this dry air starting to entrain inside the circulation, just tearing it apart basically, but that's almost an effective elevated mix layer coming in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, acting to steepen those lapse rates just a little bit. And you've got skinny cape out here with the tropical soundings, so any dry air coming into the mid-levels can act to increase that static instability just a little bit to get these the development of these little supercell storms nested within these bands of dry air that are entraining into the circulation. So that's what I'm definitely watching for next. Let me loop this long frame imagery and show you the intensification up to hurricane strength. Definitely a nice inner core reformed, and then boom, look at that, the warming of those cloud tops as that dry air is winning out once again, and as Hurricane Eta is lifting off to the north over much cooler water temperatures baked up against the shoreline here. Water temperatures begin to decrease below 27 degrees Celsius on approach to the coastline, so that should contribute to further weakening of Eta as it lifts off to the north, but it has re-intensified back into hurricane strength. Looks like the inner core has wobbled just a bit to the east of the official forecast track, but really the hurricane models, the global models are all in very close agreement on taking this north-northeastward track of a weakening tropical cyclone making landfall as a tropical storm pretty close to the Tampa area. This is the Radar Omega app, and they've actually installed a live streaming station here in the Tampa area. So this is going to be a fun thing to watch as Tropical Storm Eta gets a little bit closer. We're going to watch the pressures drop, the station pressure and sea level pressure here. Also the wind speed is going to be very interesting to watch as this system gets closer. Perfectly deployed stationary weather station here in Oldsmar, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area as this hurricane is heading off to the north-northeast. I think it's going to make landfall as a tropical storm. You can really see these warming cloud tops happening here as that dry air is definitely starting to do a number on the circulation. But that upper level low kind of carved out a favorable environment for this tropical cyclone to regain hurricane intensity, nested within that dry air that's dominating most of the Gulf of Mexico except for this little pocket here. That's an earlier water vapor image when it showed Eta at peak intensity, and you can see a little less of an influence of that dry air as we saw earlier when Eta passed over the Keys. We saw very dry air wrapping around the south side and the east side of that circulation. But let's watch the water vapor imagery. That dry air kind of erode the circulation. This looks like more like Tropical Storm Eta is moving over cooler water temperatures, and it's losing that oceanic heat content to kind of see these cloud tops warm all at once like that. I'm not really seeing much of the way of these dry air channels cutting into the inner core, but it does look like that's also happening here with that dry air coming in, and just look at that, tear it apart. This is water vapor imagery, so you're definitely seeing a drying also of these cloud tops. So I think that the next advisory is going to show a tropical storm and likely weakening back below hurricane strength. But the hurricane reconnaissance aircraft has shown minimum pressure at 983 millibars, and that's a result of that overnight intensification last night. Convection definitely blowing up out there let's see if we can get a good look at the center of this hurricane. And really, the outer bands, the outer convective bands, are my biggest concern today, as it looks like the inner core of Tropical Storm Eta is showing a weakening trend. But here, just off to the west of Cape Coral, we've got an embedded supercell structure. I believe that we saw that on satellite imagery. And you can also see some of these other supercell storms, embedded supercell structures trying to gain shape here. And that's as that dry air is coming in at the mid-levels. You can really see it at radar here with this band, this convective band actually forming on the leading nose of that dry air that's punching in. But when this dry air comes in at the mid-levels, it can be just enough to take that static instability over the top to get some embedded supercell storms within these bands. Overall, this hurricane season, we've seen a minimum in the tornado occurrence with these landfalling tropical cyclones. Even Hurricane Laura, it did have a couple of tornado warnings and a couple of confirmed tornadoes up to the north of the Baton Rouge area. But overall, really, these tropical cyclones are not producing much in the way of tornadoes. And it's possible that this one could be a little bit different and be more of a prolific tornado producer because of the dry air that's getting wrapped into the circulation right now from the Gulf of Mexico. It's not getting picked up by a trough. The reason for this northeastward turn is more due to a weakness in the subtropical ridge across the Atlantic. Now there's just a bit of a weakness, and this storm is turning north-northeast into that weakness and that blocking subtropical ridge. But there is a large-scale trough that's shearing out over top that subtropical ridge right now, and there is just a little bit of some southwest and northeast steering ahead of that system. But these are the outer rain bands that are coming ashore here in the Cape Coral area, especially up toward Tampa. I think that when this convective blob comes ashore in the Tampa area, it's going to be associated with tornado potential. This is that convective blob that I'm watching right now, including the presence of some embedded supercell structures there as well, especially on the southeast side of this convective blob. That area probably has a waterspout in progress right now over that warmer water. But that's why the tornado watch has been issued ahead of this. And we'll look at the environment also ahead of the storm to see if that dry air getting entrained in the circulation has resulted in any increase in the Cape values or the parameters for tornado occurrence. But here is that tornado watch in effect across the west coast of Florida, including the Tampa area, Sarasota, all the way down through Fort Myers, down to basically the Naples area there. But I do think that most of the tornado threat should be focused around the Tampa area, given that front quadrant of this hurricane is approaching. And just looking at radar trends, looks to me like those convective bands are going to come ashore near the Tampa area with tornado potential. And this is the official National Hurricane Center track, still showing landfall just to the north of Tampa, but that would bring some pretty dangerous westerly flow into Tampa Bay, and quite a bit of coastal flooding anticipated when Eta passes by, and that wind shifts out of the westerly direction. That's going to pile up water into that very storm surge prone area that is the Tampa Bay area. But here is that hurricane warning area in pink. That includes Tampa, includes Fort Myers, includes Port Charlotte, all of those areas out there. But I still think that landfall is going to be as a tropical storm. Those hurricane watches were issued mainly as a precaution, just because any wobble, any shift in intensity upward would result in hurricane conditions coming ashore there in the west coast of Florida. And this is the latest special advisory that upgraded Eta back up to a hurricane. NOAA reconnaissance aircraft measured the pressure down to 983 millibars, still moving off to the north-northeast. But I do think that Eta has reached peak intensity already based on satellite trends. Looking at the hurricane intensity models, you can see that it looks like this also agrees that Eta has already peaked at a Category 1 hurricane, and really all of the models are showing a decrease in intensity on approach. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be life-threatening weather out there, including the threat of tornadoes, coastal flooding around the very populated Tampa Bay area. So tropical storms could definitely be impactful and even deadly out there, so keep that in mind. But it does look like the 12Z hurricane models are showing that Eta has likely peaked in intensity at a hurricane, And as I mentioned, those forecast tracks of the hurricane models and the global models are in strong agreement with a continued track off to the north-northeast, making landfall just to the north of the Tampa Bay area. And that's not a great scenario for Tampa because those westerly winds are going to come in on the southern side of the circulation and pile up the water inside those bays and inlets across the Tampa Bay area. And also, as Hurricane Eta is approaching during the day today, during the morning as well, that there's going to be tornado potential with that front quadrant of the hurricane coming close to Tampa Bay. We'll break down the environment as well for that. And I want to discuss more surgeonator data. The surgeonator data we're finally pulling off from Hurricane Eta. And we actually have a peak water level exceeding 18 feet out there. And that water level is the storm surge with the waves on top of it. And we're pretty excited about this data. We actually have a call with a team from a university in the area, the north central Gulf Coast, to discuss the deployment of these surgeonator sensors. This is the storm surge depth that we computed based on 122nd running mean of those waves. So we're basically trying to filter out those waves to derive a storm surge depth. And this seems like a shockingly high storm surge value for Category 2 Hurricane Eta that came in there in Plaquemine Parish. But in this area, there's a 18-foot levee that protects the west side of Buras, that protects from the Gulf of Mexico. And that can act to pile up the water. It can get funneled in there to the north of the levee system and to the west of the levees, and that will pile up that storm surge. So really that 7 to 11-foot storm surge that hammered the Mississippi coastline was getting funneled in here on a concave area on the shoreline of Plaquemine Parish, a very low-lying area in elevation, protected by levees. A 16 to 18-foot levee system protects the town of Buras here. And we deployed on Johnny's Marina, which is actually just to the west of that levee system. So much of this water was piled up the west side of that levee. And we also computed significant wave height, and that's assuming a wave distribution. Basically, the highest 1/10 of the waves are about 1.26 times the significant wave height parameter, but that's something that's actually forecast in the Gulf of Mexico, and that significant wave height was higher than 5 feet. The highest 1/10 of waves was actually higher than 6.5 feet. So we had big-time 6-foot waves, 6-foot waves on top of that storm surge there over the Gulf of Mexico, measured by the surgeonator number 2 in the Buras, Louisiana area. So that's a much higher storm surge than was predicted for Plaquemine Parish, but it was also funneled in there within that levee system. And this just goes to show you the very intense complexities that happen out there, especially in Plaquemine Parish, where you have that very complex levee system out there. Given the 1-second data that we measured with the surgeonators, we were actually able to resolve individual waves. And Mark has done some wave frequency calculations. And interestingly, you could see this decreasing wave frequency. So we were having bigger waves that were a little bit further apart, lower in frequency, as the hurricane conditions worsened with time up there in Buras, which was about 50 kilometers to the south of the center of the eye. So it's just south of the southern eye wall as Zeta passed by. But as those hurricane force conditions arrived, you can see a decrease in the wave frequency as bigger waves were arriving, larger troughs, larger crests to those waves. And you can also see the increase in the wave action here, or at least the increase in the wave amplitudes there in this 1-second data with that peak storm surge. The peak water depth actually well exceeding 18 feet. And Mark even believes that we underestimated this water depth by about 1 to 2 feet. So it's possible that we were approaching a 20-foot water level, including the storm surge with the waves on top of it, which is a very high storm surge for a Category 2 hurricane coming through. But that just shows you how dangerous the water can be in that storm surge flooding in this part of the world, in Plaquemine Parish, with that complex levee system out there protecting many of these areas near and below sea level. And we did also measure data in the Venice area. That water depth exceeded 9 feet near Venice Marina. And look at that wave frequency, how that's a lot more constant. We weren't getting really the direct Gulf of Mexico impact from this. You could definitely see a surge in the salinity value there that's correlated with that peak surge. and that peak surge was over about 9.5 feet. You could see that salinity spike all the way up to about 0.4 or so. So we definitely had an intrusion of that Gulf of Mexico water here at Venice Marina. That's we measure the salinity values to really fine tune. And you can see the salinity on the bottom of the image, that blue curve with that salinity spiking up to 40 parts per thousand, showing the intrusion of that Gulf of Mexico water there at Venice Marina. This is the wave action, not really exceeding 1.5 feet very much. This could have been a arrival of a vegetation barge out there off the Gulf of Mexico that was correlated with that just before that salinity spike. But really a reduction in the waves, significant wave heights, basically below 2 meters there, well below 2 meters actually. In fact, this is in feet. So you're actually looking at wave height below 2 feet there in the Venice Marina, which is an area that's largely protected from the open Gulf of Mexico down there. But just love to see these salinity values increasing to what you'd expect for the open ocean up there at 40 parts per thousand. And the wave frequency, pretty uniform. You didn't have an increase or decrease out there. But Venice was removed from the inner core of that hurricane to such a level that I don't think that we actually experienced raw hurricane conditions up there. So let's go back to Eta once again and these convective bands that are coming ashore. No tornado warnings yet, but you can see some embedded supercell structures within this convective band. And when this convective band pivots ashore in the Tampa Bay area, certainly there could be a couple of tornado warnings, some embedded supercells that come ashore, aided by the friction of the earth. So when these convective elements move ashore, the friction of the earth can actually act to enhance the low-level shear available to these storms. That's because the surface wind slows down, even curves in toward the low pressure just a bit, and that creates more directional shear, more speed shear available to these storms at the low levels. And that's why I do think that a couple of these dominant convective updrafts, when they come ashore in the Tampa Bay area in the next few hours, they do have a chance of producing tornadoes. Let's look at the velocity out there, see if we can see any of these water spouts in progress. You could definitely see some little mesocyclones, possible water spout out there embedded within this convection. You can see some stronger winds mixing down to the surface. Probably you'll see some 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts at least when this convective band comes ashore. But we can see just a couple diffuse mesocyclones out there. Nothing that stands out as a water spout in progress, but as this gets closer to the coastline and closer to Tampa Bay and starts to impact with the friction of the earth, interact with the friction of the earth out there, I could definitely see some water spouts spinning up here in the Tampa Bay area. And you can see how storm surge prone this area is to westerly and southwesterly winds piling up there into Tampa Bay, and that could definitely lead to some flooding along the outer periphery of that bay as the water piles up in there. Even with a tropical storm moving just to the north of Tampa, that's going to create some coastal flooding out there across the Tampa Bay area. And as I mentioned, the system is getting steered off to the northeast by a weakness in the subtropical ridge off to the northeast. Finally, it's basically been acting as quite an impenetrable wall for the most part this entire hurricane season. Here is the 6C GFS showing a consolidation of that subtropical ridge just off the mid-Atlantic, and a weakness on the west side of that subtropical ridge is causing this steering current off to the northeast with Eta. A weaker storm could have been flailed out into the central Gulf, and then it likely would have died out there. But this further east track keeps it over the warmer waters of the loop current of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why we spiked up to hurricane strength. And there's also some southwest and northeast steering coming in here with this shearing out upper level trough. You can see these upper level troughs die out and lift north toward eastern Canada, lifting up and over this dominant subtropical ridge there just off the mid-Atlantic. But still, it's eroded that ridge enough to bring in just a little bit of southwest to northeast steering, but mainly through the weakness along the western edge of this subtropical ridge as it consolidates over the western Atlantic there. is causing a turn to the northeast, but it is moving over cooler waters in the Gulf of Mexico, banked up against the western coast of Florida, which could lead to some further weakening. Should lead to some weakening all the way into landfall. Look at this mega high developing out over the North Pacific, and you got another system coming into the Gulf of Alaska that's going to dive into the western U.S. and amplify and bring greater snowfall, additional snowfall to the Mountain West out there, much needed. But it looks like this system is making a beeline for the Tampa Bay area as this subtropical ridge consolidates over the western Atlantic. And this is getting picked up as well by some southwest flow associated with the pattern shift of the United States with the southwest to northeast flow there over top of the subtropical ridge. But it definitely looks like Tampa is going to have impacts from this system as a tropical storm. Those cloud tops are warming so quickly out there with this system that I think that we've already seen its peak. I'm almost certain of that. Could definitely see the dry air coming in there, invisible satellite on the west, and really the whole entire inner core has been eroded by that dry air coming in and likely moving over some cooler water temperatures as well. Look at that incredible warming of the cloud tops happening, and really nothing left of that inner core in terms of convection. No latent heat release. The colder cloud tops are with this eastern convective band. That's why the tornado watch has been issued because of this convective band, and satellite is showing that there's probably some embedded supercell structures in there with those rotating updrafts and enhancing the updraft strength, causing the updraft to punch higher up into the troposphere, and that's why these are getting picked up by satellite imagery, infrared satellite imagery in this outer convective band that is approaching Tampa down to the Cape Coral area with tornado potential. But dry air has definitely eroded the inner core, and I wouldn't be surprised if by that next advisory, by the 11 a.m. advisory, if this is back down to a tropical storm. But hurricane watches continue for the west coast of Florida from Tampa all the way down through Cape Coral. But my focus is going to be on the tornado threat with this outer convective band approaching and that drier mid-level air that's coming over top this environment, which could steepen lapse rates just enough to get some more robust convection with this tropical cyclone. And this could be a more prolific tornado producer than any tropical cyclone that we've seen so far this season. So watch this closely. Even though it is weakening and these cloud tops have warmed dramatically, there still is some life-threatening impacts expected across the west coast of Florida, coastal flooding, and some landfalling waterspouts possible today. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe across the west coast of Florida. Never stop chasing.